The word focus is bandied about an awful lot by business people, but in particular by sports people, as if they knew what focus actually was all about. The reason I say that is most people talk about focus without realizing that in actual fact we are rarely, if ever, focused as adults. It's a completely different story for children, as we will find out as this series progresses, but you and I, unfortunately, for better or for worse at this point, are adults and are therefore wired to not focus. Let's be very clear, first of all, about what we're talking about when we talk about focus. Focus, at its most basic, means paying full attention to what you are doing now. We will talk about purposeful focus a little later on in this series, but for the purposes of understanding how the mind is wired to not focus, I repeat what I've just said. Focus is about paying attention, full attention, to what you're doing now. If you take that definition, you will immediately realize that focus is very, very close, or perhaps synonymous, with mindfulness. Now, unfortunately, that word is at least as misunderstood as focus nowadays, because so much has been written about mindfulness as to confuse the reader. Mindfulness, as defined by the University of Massachusetts Medical School, is deliberately paying an unusual amount of attention to the reality of the here and now, non-judgmentally. Now, that is one hell of a loaded statement, for the simple reason that it is almost impossible for us to be non-judgmental. We are constantly saying, for example, oh, that's a nice car, or isn't it cold today, or I'm feeling a little glum, or I'm feeling a little stressed. These are all judgments about what's going on rather than actually what is going on. We're wired to prejudge, and we'll explore that as we progress as well when we talk about how we create our own reality in a later video. But we are wired primarily to not focus, and that is what I want to talk about in this particular video, because it is fundamental to our gaining an understanding of what is going on in our heads and what it is we need to do to change what is going on in our heads. There is an exceedingly good evolutionary reason as to why you and I are designed to not focus. The reason can be explained very simply in terms of, first of all, our limited ability as human beings to pay attention. Even though you have 100,000 miles of neural wiring in your brain, even though you have 6 billion neural connections in your brain, it is still a finite system. There are limits as to the extent to which you can process what is going on around you on a moment-to-moment basis. This limitation is defined in cognitive psychology as our attentional spotlight. In other words, I can't pay attention to everything that is going on around me. If I were sitting in the London Palladium and there were a cast of thousands on the stage, I would in effect only be able to shine my attentional spotlight on the star of the show. Now, because we have this limited ability to pay attention, and because in evolutionary times our objective was to make it through the day, our brains evolved to ensure that we only used our attentional spotlight when we needed it to get ourselves out of a hole or a dangerous situation in which we found ourselves. In evolutionary times, say 10 or 12,000 years ago, the men would have left the camp in the morning to hunt for tonight's dinner, and the women would have left the camp, but not so far, to collect some berries or vegetables or mushrooms to go with tonight's dinner. Everybody left the camp each morning with the intention of returning in the evening. Our primary objective in evolutionary times was to survive, to make it through the day, to make it back to the camp. For that reason, our mind evolved a couple of psychological defense mechanisms to ensure that we always held our limited attentional spotlight in reserve, so that should something life-threatening leap from the bushes whilst we were out and about, it would immediately have all of our attention and we would be able to fight it or run away, survive and live to fight another day. We're going to explore what those two defense mechanisms are, because whilst they ensured that we survived and thrived in evolutionary times, they are actually impeding us in being properly focused to do what we need to do now in the 21st century when life is somewhat different. The first one is known to cognitive psychology as automaticity. Now that's simply a big word that explains that we do most of the things that we do every day automatically. If you think about it for a moment, you dressed yourself this morning automatically. Now, what I mean by that is that according to research from a couple of UK universities, we never pay any attention to the physical act of dressing ourselves. Indeed, that research tells us that from the time we learn to dress ourselves for the first time, we always dress ourselves the same way. That means we always lead with the same foot or leg when we put ourselves into our trousers in the morning, and we always lead with the same arm or hand when we put our shirt or our jacket on. Now, that is something you never think about. It is something that you do absolutely automatically, and clearly, obviously, that is a very good thing. Life is complicated enough without knowing how to dress yourself in the morning. The same automatic approach goes for walking. You don't have to think about the multiplicity of muscle movements involved in putting one foot in front of the other. The same goes, for example, for driving. Once you have the hang of how it is you drive, you don't need to think about it anymore. You do it automatically. Automaticity can be effectively summarized as follows. Once something is no longer novel, I will do it automatically and pay none of my conscious attention to it. The objective of keeping my conscious attention, my attentional spotlight, in reserve for the man or woman eating tiger has therefore been achieved. I don't have to pay any conscious attention at all to anything that I do habitually. Now, the interesting thing from a developmental psychology point of view is that we're not born with that ability. We learn that ability within the first 36 hours of our life. Therefore, as we progress in the first year of our lives and as we progress up to the age of adolescence, our brains are beginning to be fine-tuned to ensure that once we reach adulthood, we are able to leave the camp fully attuned to doing everything automatically, so that our attentional spotlight held in reserve will ensure that we make it back to the camp in the evening. Now think about what we've just talked about, because essentially if I do everything routine automatically, that is clearly a good thing. But only up to a point. For the simple reason that I may go into work every morning and say hello to John or Michael or Susan, and I won't be saying hello to those people anymore. I'll be saying hello to the person that I kind of assume to be there, because the novelty of meeting them for the first time has worn off. Often when I say this to clients, they say, well, hold on. I mean, if I meet somebody at work every morning, you know, and I say hello to them every morning, surely I'm engaging with that person. But if you think about it, once the novelty wears off anything, we pay it less and less attention. Otherwise, we wouldn't behave towards some people that we claim to love, for example, in the manner in which we do behave. Ask yourself the question. It's It's a very simple one, and it'll get straight to the point that I'm trying to address. When you hopped into bed with your nearest and dearest last night, was it as exciting as the first time you hopped into bed with them? The novelty wears off everything. So in other words, when we are involved in routine things or with routine people, we're not really there. We're not paying any attention. In other words, we're not focused. And this is one of the key roots of the problem that we have all to deal with as normal adults, our inability to focus. However, things are about to get worse, because during the first 36 months of our lives, we develop the ability to make our ordinary everyday lives predictable. Now, this again is very important from the perspective of ensuring that I keep my attentional spotlight in reserve on the off chance that a man or woman-eating tiger leaps out of the bushes. Around the age of 2, it suddenly dawns on us as children that we are not the centre of the universe, and that other people might have a different perspective on what is going on than my perspective. This is the terrible crisis of identity that causes what is commonly known as the terrible twos. But what is actually happening is I'm developing the ability to make sense of other people. It is what is known in developmental psychology as developing theory of mind. I begin to understand that my mind is different from your mind, and each of us has a mind of our own. As this understanding dawns upon me during the 3rd year of my life, I construct what might best be described as a set of pigeonholes in my head, the kind of pigeonholes that you'd see behind a reception desk in an old-fashioned hotel. That means that I can immediately put new things into pigeonholes straight away. It provides me with a framework to enable me understand what's going on and to understand new people that I meet. The consequences of this in our complicated 21st century life are terrible. Because if I meet somebody new, I will make a first impression of them within 4 seconds. They won't have even had a chance to say what their name is. But I'll have immediately put them in one of those pigeonholes. I will have boxed them, and I will say hello and goodbye to them in the same way as if I've been saying hello and goodbye to them all of my life in a routine way. What that means is that I never see anyone new, I never meet anyone new, I never encounter any new situations. They're all immediately pigeonholed. As I say, 10,000 years ago, this was perfect. It meant that if I left my camp this morning and you left your camp, and we'd never met before, but we did encounter each other in the bush, we didn't need to have a deep and meaningful conversation in which we might get so engrossed that neither of us would see the man-eating tiger coming out of the bushes. It was the perfect defense mechanism. But nowadays, it means we miss everything that is actually going on. We assume we know what is going on based on the categorizations, the pigeonholes that we put together for ourselves when we were 3 years old. Now that means in my case, here I am in the 21st century, in 2017, trying to make sense of what is going on in 2017 based on stuff that happened to me before John F. Kennedy was elected, never mind assassinated. You see the point I'm making? Effectively, between the twin facilities of categorization, putting things in pigeonholes, and automaticity, doing everything that's already in a pigeonhole or an assumed pigeonhole automatically without paying it any attention, we never pay any conscious attention to anything that is going on during the course of our ordinary everyday lives. Indeed, even if patently new things happen to us or patently new challenges come at us, we will pigeonhole them so quickly that we will react to them as if they were something we had encountered before in our lives. And clearly, we'll make nonsense of what is going on rather than make sense of what is actually going on. The key problem with this is our perception of what is going on as a result of categorization and automaticity means that we always react to what we think is going on rather than take any real action. Now, the purpose of this video is not to depress you. The purpose of this video is to ensure that we understand that on an ordinary everyday basis, we don't see what's going on, but we try to go about our ordinary everyday lives with both hands tied behind our backs and blindfolded. That we keep doing the same things day in, day out, expecting different results, according to Einstein, the definition of madness. And that is why I would tend to believe that normal people could actually be best described as normal, crazy people. But once we understand that we cannot focus, but once we understand that we are designed to not focus with good reason, once we understand that there are particular mechanisms that we employ every day to ensure that we don't need to focus, that we don't need to pay attention, but once we understand the consequences of that, that through non-focus nothing ever changes, or indeed that we become increasingly stressed, or increasingly frustrated, or increasingly muddle-minded, once we understand that, it begins to enable us, provide ourselves with a platform for understanding what it is we can do to develop the kind of focus, proper, purposeful focus, that we need to do just what we need to do to achieve just what we want to achieve.